thinking of the movie and thinking of all the things that Hiccup had to experience as a young person, kind of feeling like ostracized and stuff like that. I know that a tough reality of the modern American church that we're a part of is there is a lot of hurt where people experience that, and something that Jesus specifically called people to welcome people in and to be a place of refuge and rest. And it hasn't been, and it's been a place where people have been like, well, you're too artsy and creative for church, or like you have too many problems for church, or you have too many this for church.
Yeah.
How do you think we as Christians change that reality, or maybe especially from your psychology background, how do we honor the reality that hurt has been done, but then move to maybe change that part of church culture?
That is another tough question that I don't know if I feel fully qualified to answer, because that is like a huge issue in the church today. If you hear so many people talk about how they despise the church because they struggle with a certain sin or certain part of themselves, that when they revealed it, they became outcast to the church, and they were like, we don't want you here, you don't belong here anymore. And it's sad to hear that, because like you said, that's not what Jesus taught us. Like, you look at Jesus, he welcomed everyone in. He welcomed the poor, the sick, the tax collectors. The whole story about him talking to the Samaritan woman. In that time, in that culture, that was like unheard of. You would never be like do that as like a Jewish male. And here Jesus is like, yeah, screw what culture thinks. Like, I care about everyone. And me saying that, like, you know, like regarding certain sins that people like struggle with, and like that might be why they get kicked out of the church. I'm not saying like, oh, those things are good or we should excuse those things, but as like Christians and as the church, instead of like pushing people out, we should be the ones there to like support them and like help them. Like, when people feel like they have nowhere else to go, they should feel welcomed in the church. And a lot of times there are a lot of churches out there that make it more, you're not our problem, we don't want to deal with you.
Yeah.
And that's, I feel like, totally against what we should be doing as Christians.
Yeah. I was thinking of How to Train Your Dragon and just the setup of the village and the Vikings and stuff like that. You could do a lot of parallels where the leaders of the village are really angry with Hiccup because they're just like, you just do not get it, and you are just not changing to fit within this ecosystem of people and this community.
Would you please just listen to me?
You've thrown your lot in with them. You're not a Viking. You're not my son.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, you said this earlier, it's Hiccup's differences that actually create an even better setup and stuff like that. So how do you think we, because you said something that stood out about your coaches on wrestling, is that they were actually encouraging you and stuff like that. So do you ever feel a tension between encouraging and feeling like people are trying to say that because you're encouraging someone or trying to be kind to someone, that means that you're like totally fine with anything and everything that they do? Or and how would you maybe reconcile that from a Christian worldview, where that maybe isn't the case, that just because you're kind to everybody or you're kind to people, that it doesn't mean what people want to impose on you that it means?
Yeah, I feel like that's another thing that I wanted to address too, is like, with me saying that the church should just welcome everyone in, I'm not saying that we should just accept everything or like accept the sin and be like, oh yeah, this is okay. Because I think there are a lot of churches that are doing that, where they compromise what the Bible says in order to excuse certain sins or things that would be considered sins in the Bible. And I think that's not okay. I think, like, back to wrestling, like, for me, it was with kind of getting like mistreated because I wasn't athletic. I don't think it should have been like, I don't think it's something where it should just be like accept you and just let you in, and then like you don't have to change or anything. I think it's like letting you in, but then like helping you improve. Like for me, instead of just letting me stay maybe not as skilled at the sport and just excusing that and letting me kind of do whatever, it would have been like inviting me in and then helping me grow, like helping teach me stuff and like get more knowledge. So I guess like, yeah, with like wrestling, like it wasn't just like, oh yeah, just come to practice and like do whatever kind of thing. It was my coach like invited me to come like weightlift with him and other guys in the morning and stuff like that. So it's like coming alongside you to like help you grow, if that makes sense.
I love that example, that there's a act of love in the invitation, and then going the extra step to be willing to say, hey, I know you're not up to the level of some of these other people, but I'm going to make space for you and invite you to come to these things to grow. And for you, like, you still had to say yes to that, because you could have been like, no, I don't want to get better, or I don't want to whatever.
I'm content where I'm at.
Yeah. So I have a follow-up question for that, and then maybe we can actually wrap up. But I think that's a great example of kind of what we were talking about, like what it looks like to love and still hold a standard that God has. Is like you can do both. Like you can be compassionate and kind and welcoming and encouraging to someone of any walk of life, and yet still invite them into spaces to see this is what it can look like when we live. Because I'm sure there was probably an inspiration where you saw guys who were, you know, jacked and were really good wrestlers or like seemed really confident, and you were like, there's nothing wrong with that. I'd be cool. I'd be cool finding that. And so then when there's these older, you know, male wrestling coaches who are like, hey, let's go hit the weights, you're like, okay, like cool. So they're showing you a different side of like what life could look like.